Welcome to the Billionaire Lifestyle Podcast with your host, Emmett Muckles. Please visit iTunes, Stitcher, or emmettmuckles.com to listen to all the episodes for free.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Billionaire Lifestyle Podcast. I am your gracious host, who is named after his father, who was named after his father. There's three of us, but there's only two of us left. Today on the Billionaire Lifestyle, I have a precious gift for you. There's this woman that I saw when I was trying to learn yoga, and I investigated further because something stood out to me. Something said, you need to know this woman. And I found her. After many searches in Google, I found
you go right ahead.
Cara Judea-Alhadeff.
Yes. Yeah, beautiful.
How are you today?
How am I today? Let's see. Today specifically has been particularly challenging. In general, I am pretty fantastic because I'm in the midst of a radically different kind of project in my life. Today, a lot of obstacles presented themselves in ways that I found myself habitually in a kind of a series of habitual responses that I didn't like about myself. Because I saw myself in a groove of just reacting out of familiarity, and it's something that I don't agree with either. In terms of, as you mentioned, the yoga, in terms of a yoga practice of being present and not just reacting out of habit, but also theoretically my work around being comfortable with the unfamiliar or with the vulnerable. But I was particularly vulnerable today, and that was difficult for me, and it was difficult for me that it was difficult for me, rather than thriving in the challenge.
But you know, Mercury is in retrograde, so take that in how you want it.
Okay, it's been a while since I was aware of. Yes, all right. Thanks for letting me know.
Yeah, my wife and I were having this conversation because words were just bouncing off our cranium, and they just weren't registering, but. I'm going to ask you this simple question because I don't think I can do you justice because you're a photographer, you're a yoga practitioner and teacher. You are very much into the environment and how we move about this earth. You're a PhD. The list goes on and on and on. And you're a photographer. Did I say that? You're a photographer.
You did. Yes. Yeah. And university professor also, yeah.
And that's one of the things that really got me, because as you are an activist, you're a published and critically acclaimed author, a visual artist, academic scholar, yoga teacher, mom.
Yes.
And like I said, you and I are kindred spirits. So how do you see all these parts? How do they fit together so that you can move in and out of them simultaneously? How do they fit together?
Well, that is my daily practice. Witnessing how to be functional in a world, in a culture, a society that, as you know, reduces our outer appearance to easily digestible categories that reduces thought to soundbite, to easily digestible aphorisms. So trying to straddle the worlds of complexity, which I think our world is, and how it's presented to us, which is stripped down, reduced, this idea that there's some sort of neutral standard out there, when in fact we're all incredibly layered beings that, if we saw the relationship between, for example, art, sexuality, ethnicity, education, parenting, our bodies, the medical establishment, if we saw those connections, kind of as a baseline of our culture, I think we would not be involved in this horror of environmental devastation and social injustice that we are involved with. So for me, it's a daily practice of how do I live in what I know in my heart to be these interconnections between all these different elements, and also be confronted with a society that says, no, it has to be this or that. It has to be black or white. You know, we're terrified of ambiguity in our culture.
Yeah.
And for me, it's a daily practice to say, wait a minute, we may be terrified of it, but the fact is our world is ambiguous, and that is the beauty. You know, that's the fertility, that's the juice of these in-between spaces.
So with that,
so, I mean, I could go on for that.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. So with that, you know, as you write and teach about gender, sexuality, ethnicity, motherhood, ecology, and art, you know, how do you, with other people, how do you see them connecting? I know you probably have a vision or an understanding for yourself, but when it comes to other people and connecting with that, how do you make that happen? How can you get it to convey that energy to others so that they can digest it?
Yeah, that's a massive, massive challenge. I often find myself, for example, with my dissertation, my doctoral dissertation, I didn't have an editor for that, and I didn't have an editor for my first two books. The first book is a critical philosophy book dealing with the body, the vulnerability of the body, and the second book is about climate justice. And each book has done very well in a public sphere, but I didn't want an editor because I wouldn't listen to them. I knew I wouldn't listen to them. I have a real challenge with being audience specific, I guess, even though I know we're supposed to speak to, you know, various audiences. You're speaking about arts to an art audience. But for me, the joy of being alive is to really make those connections and to not just be audience specific, but to be in a place where an audience may be expecting one kind of language or one kind of conversation or dialogue, and to hopefully have a pleasant, you know, on some level, or exciting, maybe not pleasant, but exciting discovery of the unexpected connections, of unexpected relationships. So I tend to, I'll say, not skew, but I tend to take a lot of risks with my audiences.
Okay.
And when I say audience, I mean in terms of the arts or teaching the students, but also my readers. I guess I'll say it that way. For example, I have a 7-year-old son, and I think that a lot of our culture underestimates children's capacity for complex thought, and I think we also underestimate our, as adults, capacity to unlearn what we think we know. And for me, that's a really vital position, to be in a place of curiosity. And if we're just speaking a language that we assume we know, then how much learning is there? How much can we really empathize with someone who we think we don't have any relationship to because of, you know, cultural background or.
But you know what?
Yeah.
But you know what? Speaking of that, that's a good point when you say understanding someone else, because, you know, I realize this as of late, and I've raised a couple of daughters, but it really hits home now that fundamentally men and women have these two different interpreters in their head. Yes. And each one of us is wondering why the other doesn't get it.
Right. There's a lot of wondering.
You know, you just made me think of that. But what the question that bubbled up while you were speaking is, you know, you have some ideas that are very fundamental about the human condition, about where we are on this planet. And do you get a lot of pushback or opposition for your stance on and how you move through this earth? Because most people would see you as very unorthodox.
Yeah. Since I was a kid, actually, both in terms of in school, in my family, among my friends' families, where people. I mean, I remember having arguments about 409. I don't know if 409 is even still.
You're talking about the cleaner?
Yeah, I mean, out there. It may not be on the market anymore. But with my cousin and my aunt, when I was 12 or something, because I was telling them that was so much more dangerous to our body's health than any possible germs that could be in the house. I mean, we weren't in a hospital where there were real germs, necessarily. But then years later, my aunt and cousin said, "You know what? I know what you're talking about now. I got it. I'm not changing my life necessarily. I'm still using these products that are about sanitizing our not just our bodies, but our whole psyches, as far as I'm concerned." So I've gotten a lot of aggression from step parents, that kind of thing, around particularly around it's often around body issues in terms of health concerns, where it came back later. You know what? I understand now. Or even around resource use, with not wasting food, growing your food, and then having a respect for the sacred of what it means.
All right, we have to backtrack so we can fill people in. So help people to understand your base philosophy as far as when it comes to your personal environment, your local environment, the global environment.
Absolutely.
And your vision of self.
Yes.
So
make a quickie.
Make a quickie.
Again, interconnections. The metabolism of my body is reflected in the metabolism of the Earth's body. If I'm going to contaminate my body, there's going to be a direct relationship to contaminating the Earth's body, and vice versa. And carrying that on, if I'm going to inflict some sort of injustice to my physical body, and then the Earth body, that's also going to inflict some kind of pain potentially into another person's body. For example, when I'm obviously everyone's got their iPhones. I don't have an iPhone. I use a flip phone, but every time someone's phone buzzes, that's that mechanism that makes the phone vibrate is from a mine in Central Africa, near the Congo.
Yeah.
It's just, for me, it's a continual awareness of the relationship between body, earth, and multiple other bodies in other cultures and other worlds that we're always bouncing back, reflecting our impacts. It's this constant cause-effect spiral. And I breathe it. And that is something that is extremely challenging for a lot of people because you have to make a lot of different life choices.
Yeah.
And we're just, as you know, we're so immersed in our convenience culture that.
So, but before we get to your book, before we get to Zazu's Dreams, tell me how you got to now. Tell me where you were born and how you ended up in this great space. Well, actually, you're in Michigan now, which is woohoo. I'm from Michigan.
You're from Michigan. I'm here for you, Emmett.
But
I've only been here a couple months. Yeah.
Yeah, but tell me that journey. Where did you begin? Where did you come into this earth?
Well, my physical body came in Boulder, Colorado. Both sides of my family are Sephardic. They're from a small island off of Turkey, the island of Rhodes. But I was born in Boulder, Colorado, and parents divorced when I was 6, ended up moving to Texas with my mom and stepfather and our dogs, and experienced just extraordinary anti-Semitism, and became aware of what it meant. I mean, Boulder was incredibly white and no Jews at the time. Now there are lots of Jews in Boulder. But then it was very different in the 70s. But moving to Texas, Dripping Springs, Texas, which was a tiny town near Austin. I don't know what's happened to it, but there were some Latinos at the time. But that's all in terms of anyone who wasn't WASP, basically. And it was incredible. Oh.
Hold on. I lost you there for a minute. Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Oh, sure. And this may be too detailed, but I would sharpen my fingernails grow. I have a part of my photographic work is that I collect various body parts that are interesting to me
on film.
Say again?
On film, correct?
On film. Well, I've been saving my fingernails, for example, in little jars since I was a kid. But it was a time when I began to understand. I was there between 6 and 11, and then I left because it was too much. I went back to Boulder and lived with my dad at the time. But it was when I really got clear of what it meant to be living on the margins, both in terms of my ethnicity and also having a different kind of body because I was so small compared to the big Texans. And then also the way we were living. We were living totally off the grid, compost toilet. It was a very different kind of lifestyle. So I began to make those connections between different ways of living on the margins and how those actually can be bridged. Came back to Boulder. I was 11, and that's when I started taking yoga in the rec center of the gym. And I remember the heavy stench of men's sweat. It was the wrestler gym, and we would sit there chanting. We couldn't stand up because it was so low, the wrestling gym. But that was my first experience with yoga, and so I've been practicing since I was 11.
And you also lived on a commune.
Yeah, since I was 18, I've been living in intentional communities around the world, in North Africa and throughout Europe and the U.S.
So you have to explain that because most people don't really understand what communes are about. They just kind of remember like, oh, that's from some hippie thing in the right, and dropping acid and something else. Literally, yeah. But it's an intentional community.
So far, no, done all the ones in, but yeah, the hippie factor, yes, has been there.
And the reason the reason I'm so into, the reason I understand communes is because I deal a lot with solar energy, as we talked about before. Right. And a lot of these communities were off the grid, and I come from Detroit, so everything about me was very industrialized until I got into the solar industry, and I was like, wow, there is an alternative to life other than this capitalistic way and just consume. And I started to see, as a matter of fact, that's how our solar industry began to be prosper in America, was through the communes because they started off grid. I
didn't realize that history was there. Okay.
Yeah, in Northern California. The reason I wanted to extract that from you is so that people could really understand your dynamic, because it's not like you were a person who were really ingrained in this capitalistic society and industrialized society and said, I'm done. I'm just going to switch. This has been a lifelong process for you. This has been how you came into the world. So being in this state that like I'm in, which I grew up in, would be like you saying, oh, I'm just going to switch teams.
Right. Well, there's been some team switching just in that, Boulder was a hippie town in the 70s. And of course now it's ridiculously affluent.
Now it's a trust fund town.
Right. Exactly. Absolutely. But, even back then, both my parents are university professors in the arts. My dad's an art historian, and my mom's a visual artist. My stepfather is a sculptor. So there was that kind of outside world, but still they were living, my dad's house is basically a museum. And so he definitely is not, part of that world. And I lived my whole teenage world with him. So there was something, it was a lot of struggle, establishing this kind of understanding in relation to certain family members, but everything just made sense. And I think it made sense because of what I experienced with anti-Semitism. I mean, I really think that that living as such a minority as a child, just made all the connections clear. Just like, of course you fight because that's what you do. You've got to fight to survive. And then the fighting can be beautiful because it's about alliance. It's like there is alliance with the trees that are being cut down for people's ridiculous, desires and catalogs so that they can go shopping at Christmas. And, I mean, yeah, I think that there was just something that was aside from family dynamics. It was something, maybe it's ancestral memory on some level, that made those connections clear.
Gotcha. Now, I want to talk about Zazu Dreams. And I got the book, and my portion is on its way to you. And that's Zazu Dreams Between the Scarab and the Dung Beetle, a cautionary fable for... Now, I had problems with this word with my daughter as we were reading.
Sure.
Anthropocene, right?
Anthropocene.
Anthropocene.
Yes.
Anthropocene era. All right,
Yeah.
A cautionary fable for the Anthropocene era. This is a book that really should be digested between a parent-child, I think. Because
a relationship.
Yeah, because we began reading it. I would read a paragraph and she would read a paragraph, or I would read a page and she would read a page. And we started with that. And then her energy level shifted and she wandered off.
Yes. Okay.
But I got into the book just myself, from reading it, because it's a great vocabulary. It literally sounded like you.
Yes.
When I was reading it, I'm sitting in the room with Cara, and she is writing this into my head.
Oh, fantastic. Okay.
Where did this book come from? I know that you have a son.
Yes.
And it looks like he would be the product of you and I versus just the product of you. So how did this come about?
Let's see. So again, going back to the Sephardic cultural issue about my background as an Arab Jew, it was meant to be a children's book originally. There are less than a handful of children's books about Sephardic Jews, about Jews from the Middle East, from Spain, from North Africa, or Mizrahi Jews from Iraq, Iran, Turkey. I'd say maybe 3 books out there for children. So originally I was writing it as a children's book, and then I'm addicted to footnotes. As you can see, there are 400 endnotes. In my first book, I think I have something like over 1,000 endnotes. And it became more of a cross-generational book. And now I see it as a fable for adults, but to be shared with other generations. And as I was writing it, I realized the way that feels most authentic and whole, integrated, for me to talk about multicultural Jewish histories is to put it in the framework of ecology and environmental devastation, to look at the relationship between global ecological extinction and extinction of ethnic minorities. Because for me, it's hand in hand. I think, we look around and, we can't make the separation between those two realities that are getting more and more insane every day. And in that, I see that that's where the power of us building coalition and collaborating. All my work has always been about collaboration. And even in high school, when I was president of Amnesty International, we were working with the FMLN, in El Salvador. I mean, it was always about how do we do this in coalition? How do we cross boundaries, work with people who are fighting similar struggles? Like in 1992, I wanted to work with various Native American groups around how do we educate people around the horrors of the New World, quote unquote, in relation to the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, because the connection historically is massive, and for us to not make bridges is doing us a huge disservice in terms of actually making social change.
I have a question for you. Was the expulsion of the Jews around the same time the expulsion of the Moors?
Yeah. So there were many, inquisitions in Spain and Portugal over the 1300s, 1400s, 1500s went on. There was the year, which is what the book is about in many ways. This idea of conviviality, of convivencia, the golden age where the Moors, the Jews, the Christians lived together in relative harmony.
Yeah.
And then where the tables were turned, and then the Jews were burned at the stakes. The Moors were burned at the stakes. A lot of the Jews went to Muslim lands, or lands, pre-Arab lands, and were welcomed. They also had extraordinary challenges in many places too. But like my grandmother was from Turkey, and she said that she always felt most welcome in Turkey compared to all the places that she lived throughout Europe. And she was in the Holocaust. My father was hiding during the Holocaust. But she always felt like the Arab communities welcomed her more than any other religious communities, including Ashkenazic Jews.
So when are you going to do any readings of the book? What's your plans for Zazu Dreams?
So I've done, maybe 60 performances of it. I performed various characters, and then I've had in different communities where I've lived in New York and Colorado and Pennsylvania. I've had various activists and young people also performing different characters. And then we have the visuals. My mom, Micaela, Amato, did the paintings, and I think there are about 80 activists, both from 12th century Iraq, like Ibn Sina, to Gandhi, to Stephen Hawking, Rachel Carson, Martin Luther King Jr.'s in there. So there are all these paintings. So we project them, and our next big performance is going to be at the Conference on World Affairs in Boulder in April at the Planetarium, where Rob Myas, who's the love of my life, performs with me. He's a batch ecologist, and we perform variations of Zazu Dreams. So the next one, I think, will be there, if not something before in Asheville.
Awesome. I want to delve into this, which is physical body image. And
yes.
Because we have such body shaming, particularly in this country, that I don't see when I travel abroad. I don't when I go anywhere else outside of North America. I don't see this. As a matter of fact, I remember the first time I went to the beach and I saw someone who was topless. I was just kind of like, whoa. And then I was like, oh, it's just something. It's like when my mom used to come from her bedroom to the bathroom. I'm like, what's the big deal?
What's the deal,
but
right?
Why is it so detrimental here? Why is it so taboo in the United States? Because you're you're a very free person, which is you're pretty much what you see is what you are.
Right. I'm not hiding much. Yeah.
Yeah. And not many people are like that, which I commend you for. Why do you think people are so stuck on that?
Well, again, going back to how we look we look at relationships between different ideas and different peoples. Because we are so afraid of ambiguity, I think that makes our bodies dangerous, because our bodies are ambiguous. We have definitely, we have different conflicting emotions, conflicting feelings and sensations in our bodies, and they get sick in weird ways, and we rely on medical experts to take care of us from the most basic things like birth. I had an unassisted home birth with Zazu in Oakland, in California, and one reason why I had that was because I didn't even my midwife, I didn't want to be there. I wanted it to just be us, because that relinquishing control to the expert is, again, I think, one of the reasons why we are in such a horrendous state in terms of both social and ecological issues. And, whether it's our puritanical history of coming over here, and that being the foundation of so much of our government, and feeding into the sanitation industry, the hospital, the medical establishment, and now, with sanitary dispensers, I'm forgetting.
Because
hand sanitizer.
Because my wife, who is practicing to be a doula.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah.
And she is just horrified at the amount of C-sections that happen.
Yeah. The politics are unreal.
That are so unnecessary. And she's also she doesn't understand why there's so many horizontal births.
Yeah. No, it's perverse. Right. It's out of control. And breastfeeding, I breastfed Zazu till he was 4. That's the average, in terms of the world's average. So I thought, well, if it's the world average, that makes a lot more sense to me than the U.S. average.
Yeah. What's the average in the U.S.? It's weaned off really early here, right?
Well, the American Pediatric Association, which I think is actually something that we really need to question, but they do recommend 1 year, which, if women would do 1 year, if they're able to, and of course this is all about ability. I know, obviously, I was teaching prenatal yoga, and a lot of my students couldn't breastfeed for a number of reasons. So I'm certainly not saying that only breastfed is. But for those people who can, there's a lot that we have to learn, obviously, from other cultures.
Yeah, this is going to be a good one, because I know you have these challenges consistently. To live with your particular ethics in a place where it is the polar opposite, and how do you deal with that? I mean, you deal with it on just by me knowing you in this little time. And I think my perceptions were pretty much in the ballpark. You deal with racial justices, you deal with environmental. How do you navigate that on a daily basis without going completely bonkers?
Well, I think I am completely bonkers, especially recently. I don't do it necessarily as gracefully as I would like to. I was speaking to a friend of mine tonight who I've known, a lot of my close friends I've known since I was 3, 4, 5. And she's, someone who I care deeply about. And I was telling her that I haven't learned the art of not taking things personally. I tend to take things very personally, and that makes this straddling these different worlds, even more difficult. Having community is key, absolutely key. Having other women, other activists, men, transgender friends who are fighting from their perspective or not. And when I say fight, I don't mean just banging our heads against a wall, but just like what you were saying in the beginning of our conversation about how do you have to navigate the microaggressions at every turn.
Yeah.
You know? So it's a fight, but it's also just breathing because we live in this world, and doing it in relation to others who are doing it from their particular angle for me is key. And I think when I struggle most is when I feel that I am not in relation to others who are also conscious and alive to the sensitivity of what it means to have to think through, to not take for granted. I guess that's a big part of it. To not take for granted, where it's not just normalcy dictating.
All right. I'm going to ask you this last question.
Okay.
What is it that you want your life to sum up when they say, here is her premise?
To understand these connections to, it comes again and again and again, that for us to be immersed in the possibility of being fully alive, not even just to be fully alive, but the possibility of being fully alive, is about having our tentacles, our tendrils extending out into spaces that may feel precarious. And then that's not just okay, but that's it.
Yeah.
Like that precariousness, it's beautiful.
Awesome.
Shared precariousness. I'll say it that way.
All right. So where can everybody get your works, your books, your photography? Where? Spell it out.
Spell it out. So let's see, ZazuDreams.com. You can get my two first books. With the first one, Viscous Expectations, Justice, Vulnerability, the Obscene. And that's a critical philosophy book, but it's all about the body, sexuality, arts, ethnicity, as strategies for social justice. And then Zazu Dreams, book that we were talking about. So you can get that on that. And then also we have the drawings are available, the paintings, the original paintings. And we just made T-shirts to bring more awareness to the immigrants in our country, because so much of the book has to do with immigration.
Wait a minute, go back. We broke up. T-shirts for whom?
So there's Zazu Dreams, and they're about immigration and the importance of understanding that we all come from different places, and so the T-shirts are a composite of the characters in Zazu Dreams. So those can be found on ZazuDreams.com, and then my website with my photographic work, which is in San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and Austria in the Salzburg. So when you go back, it's in the Salzburg Museum of Modern Art, is my first name, Cara Judea.com.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you so much. Thank you, Emmett. You know how I am. I
love it. Thank you.
I want to thank you for being on the Billionaire Lifestyle Podcast.
Yeah, I'm grateful to have shared this with you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, you know how this ends. When you get out the shower, drop the towel, walk up to the mirror, wipe the fog off, and then just sit there and bask in the glory of you. Because the Billionaire Lifestyle is not about money. Remember this. After two cells met from two different people, depending on who you are, could have been some other way too, but two cells met. And then 30 days later, 2 to the power of 30, you were a billionaire. From there, you just expanded out. And if you don't believe how much of a miracle you are, the next time you get close to that mirror and you're basking in your glory, look at those eyeballs, because they look like the nebulae. As above, so below. You are a miracle. Life is fractal. If you really want to get to it, your thoughts create what happens when you take action in your life. As above, so below. Remember.
Fantastic.
If you don't feel like you are loved, Remember this, someone loves you, they're just not telling you because they're scared to, because they have their own insecurities. Someone is looking at you in awe, in wonder, and they are just afraid to talk to you. So when you don't feel loved, remember there's someone who's just looking at you, and if you can't find that person, think of my voice, because I got mad love for you. Till next time, love you all. Peace.